Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Sten Ekberg here at Wellness for Life, and we're doing a seminar today on autoimmunity. Again, there's a lot of misconceptions about all these topics that we're covering, and they're all very, very prevalent. They're affecting huge percentages of the population. So, autoimmunity, according to the official agencies, it affects about 50 million adults in the US. That's about 20% of the population. And that's just the ones that have overt symptoms, that are affected, that know they have it, that have started a noticeable disease process. There is 80 to 100 different autoimmune diseases. Can you get me some water, please? And the only current treatment is immunosuppressant, and it has devastating long-term side effects because you're creating imbalances, you're interfering with the body's immune system. And they want more research to learn to modulate the immune system. So we'll talk about this also. And all of these facts and opinions are from the AARDA, the American Autoimmune Related Diseases and Disorders. So what we're going to talk about is what's really going on and what can really be done about it in a holistic manner. Excuse me for just a moment. So first of all, before we understand autoimmunity, we want to start understanding why do we even have an immune system? What is it for? How does it work? And the basic purpose is to recognize non-self. So all your cells look a certain way. They have certain markers, so your body can identify them as yourself. And anything that is not yourself is non-self, such as foreign proteins, for example. And the only purpose of the immune system is to search and destroy. It's not there to ask nicely, would you please move along? It only has one way to deal with things, and that's to kill it. So foreign proteins, for example, those are things that you eat. Everything that you eat is foreign to your body until you have had the opportunity to break it down to a single amino acid. If it's a single amino acid, it's now small enough to not have immune properties or antigen properties. Now, it's simply the smallest little building block for other proteins, and that's what your body can use to build new tissues. But anything bigger than one amino acid, and proteins have hundreds of amino acids, anything bigger than 2, 3, 4, 5 amino acids is going to invoke an antigenic response. It's going to create an immune reaction. And we also have the immune system to recognize non-self in the form of invaders, such as bacteria, virus, pathogen, and toxins. If we didn't have a way to destroy and eliminate these things, then everything would be chaos. It would quickly take over and we would succumb very, very quickly. The other thing that the immune system needs to recognize is when your own cells have gone wrong. So we have defective cells, cells where something went wrong. They're not doing what they're supposed to. They can't fulfill their purpose. The immune system needs to recognize them and clean them out. Otherwise, there's just all this debris laying around. Another form of self that causes damage is mutated cells in the form of cancer. Those are your own cells, but there was a mutation, and now they are wreaking havoc. They're renegades. They're not participating in this fine-tuned balance called homeostasis. And you have thousands, tens of thousands of mutated cancer cells in your body at any given time, but your immune system, if it's working properly, will recognize them, find them, search them, and destroy them. The other thing that we're going to talk about, and we'll explain what this is in a second, that there's a part of yourself inside the cell called nucleoproteins. And if they get into the circulation, then that is a really, really bad thing. And that may be, I mean, everything the immune system does is essential, but this is like way, way up there. And we'll talk about why. So nucleoproteins, what are they? So first, we have to understand that how cells develop. So first we have stem cells. And a stem cell is an undifferentiated cell. That means they're all the same. And a stem cell is a cell that can become anything. That it has the potential to become a liver cell or a bone cell or an eye cell or a brain cell. Once they develop into the differentiated cells, then they're mature cells and they look like this. And then inside the nucleus, they have unique markers. So the liver has nucleoproteins that are unique for the liver. The bone has markers that's unique for the bone, and they're only supposed to exist in those areas. So muscle cells, muscle markers are only supposed to be in the muscle, and spleen markers are only supposed to be in the muscle. And then, so we're taking a couple of steps and then we'll tie it all together. So bear with me and try to pay attention. You don't have to know these words. We'll pull it together for you. So then there's another big word, reticuloendothelial system. And this is basically your body's sewer. So when you have a healthy organ, then that organ has certain cells that wear out. And when they wear out, then they get sloughed off, they get eliminated, your body makes new cells. But let's say that you have 100 cell turnover, and there's millions of cells, but call it 100 per second or whatever. Now, these cells need to go somewhere, and these cells have nucleoproteins in them. They have these unique markers. So they have to be taken care of and eliminated before they can go anywhere else. So they drop into the local sewer in the area surrounding that organ. And if we stay within the 100 cells, then that's the capacity of that local sewer. And the local sewer can keep up and keep that local environment really nice and tidy. There's no spillover, there's no waste. The cleanup crew can keep up and keep everything nice. But let's say that we have a stressed organ. We have an organ that is overworked, or something's going on where it's not happy. We get some cell damage, some tissue damage. And now instead of 100 cell turnover, we have 500 cells per unit of time that are breaking down, spilling their guts into the sewer. But the sewer can only handle 100 cells. So 400 of those cells are going to spill over. It's going to get nasty. That sewer is going to put things everywhere. And now, those nucleoproteins, because the local reticuloendothelial cells, like macrophages and these things that they're like Pac-Mans, they gobble things up, they can't keep up. So a lot of these nucleoproteins, they're going to spill over and push their way out, and they're going to end up in the circulation. And now the body has to defend itself. So now the body develops nucleoprotein antibodies. They're little tag teams, if you will. So now these nucleoproteins get tagged for destruction, but they're circulating. So they're going to get everywhere. So the immune system is going to react and start sending antibodies and macrophages everywhere. And now we have an autoimmune response. So how does autoimmune disease develop? Because autoimmune responses are there all the time. They're necessary. But how does it get out of hand? It's if we get too much of this, and now you have a constant flow of liver cells or liver nucleoproteins that are circulating in your foot or in your brain, because these things are instructions to build new tissue. And you don't want a liver growing in your brain. You don't want a liver growing in your foot. You don't want a thyroid growing in your spleen or in your gut. If we didn't have this autoimmune response, then things in the body would get out of hand very, very quickly. There would be no way of organizing it and keeping your body parts looking the way they're supposed to, in the way they're supposed to. So we have to understand that everything that the body does is on purpose. There is nothing stupid that we can't trust. If the body does it, we can trust it. It's for a good reason. And so autoimmune disease is not a bad thing. It's bad if it gets to the point of disease, but the process of autoimmunity is not a bad thing. And now your immune system will produce antibodies to search and destroy everywhere, and the antibodies will attack all nucleoproteins and some of them in the original organs. So if you have thyroid cells in your gut and your body sends out a search party for these thyroid cells or thyroid proteins, then they're going to circulate everywhere, and some of them are going to find their way to the thyroid and attack the healthy cells in the thyroid. And so now you have a vicious cycle of continued breakdown. And the reason we want to deal with this is that it progresses. And we want to understand that autoimmunity, whether we have a diagnosed or manifest identified autoimmunity or not, this process goes on in every disease process that has been going on and have some degree of degeneration. There is an autoimmune process going on in that. That's just the way that the body deals with it. Yes, we have a question.
So do autoimmune responses deal with cancer cells that are building new cells in the right context but more than are required? Or is that the immune system doesn't recognize cancer cells that are dividing as wrong types of cells in the location?
It is probably that, so let me step out and repeat that question here. So we have a question that says, do autoimmune responses deal with cancerous cells that are building new cells in the right context, but more than are required? So cancerous cells are never, they're already mutated. So cancer cells are never in the right context. They have stepped out of the context. They're renegades. They're not listening to the rest of the body. So the immune system, part of the autoimmunity, part of this response is to find and destroy these cancer cells. And when the immune system can't keep up, it is because there's some other process that has broken down, that the immune system is weakened or overwhelmed, or there's just a lot of chaos and confusion going on. So let's take an example of one of the most common forms of autoimmunity called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And so you can take a blood test and you can look for antibodies. They're called thyroid peroxidase. It's an enzyme. It's a protein that's unique to the thyroid. And if the thyroid spills, then you're going to have thyroid antibodies, TPO antibodies circulating. And if you find them, then you have an autoimmune disease. Well, it used to be that they took a blood test and they said, if you have less than 5, you're okay. But if you have more than 5, that's not okay. Now there's too many antibodies and you have an autoimmune disease towards your thyroid. Well, this became so common that basically couldn't test anybody without finding TPO antibodies. So they raised the level. So now you have to be over 34, and that was last year in the state of Georgia. Different states have different rules depending on how many people have it. And they don't like to diagnose autoimmune disease because they don't know what to do with it. And so now in Georgia, you have to get over 34 to have autoimmune disease, which if they kept it at 5, that would make most of the population have autoimmune thyroid disease. And they don't test for it because it's not going to change how they treat it. But it turns out 80 to 90% of hypothyroid cases are in fact autoimmune. But the way that they treat it is by just replacing the hormone. They say, oh, well, the thyroid tanked out. They can't produce the hormone. Let's just put the hormone in from the outside. So a couple of years ago in 2015, there were 121 million prescriptions of Synthroid or related synthetic hormones. And the reason they don't test, the reason they simply prescribe the thyroid is that they don't know what to do with the autoimmune disease. The only way they know to deal with the immune system is to suppress it. That's basically standard treatment for any time that you have symptoms from the immune function, then they suppress your immune function. But where did all of this start? So we have organ degeneration, like we talked about. And the degeneration causes excessive nucleoprotein spillover, which causes an autoimmune response. So far, we covered that. But what caused the organ degeneration in the first place? Why are these organs so sick that the cells are breaking down and spilling over? Because of all the things that we've talked about in the other seminars: toxicity, deficiency, inflammation, and stress. So when we stop living in accordance with nature, or where we have excessive trauma or stress or just bad circumstances, now we get organ degeneration that leads to all of this. So again, in the medical system, the only treatment traditionally has been immune suppression. And that sounds bad enough, suppression, but what does it really mean? It means put some poison in the body to keep the immune system from doing what it's supposed to do. There's just basically that, the only word to describe it, it's poisoning. You're poisoning the immune system, you're poisoning the body so the immune cells don't function. Did we have a question?
Can you explain the relationship between the hormones and the antibody counts? What was the name of the hormone?
Oh, the hormone is called T4. Thyroid hormone is T4, but the enzyme that finalizes the process of making T4 is called thyroid peroxidase, or TPO. And when the thyroid cell breaks down, then that enzyme is what spills out. So in this case, it's not specifically a nucleoprotein, but it is a unique protein to the thyroid. And if everything is working perfectly, then you're basically supposed to have 0 or 1 or 2 maybe antibodies, because again, some breakdown and some autoimmunity is going on all the time, but it should be barely detectable. But as sick as we're getting as a population, we are having more and more organ stress, so antibodies are becoming quite common. So that's why they're raising those limits. So the standard is immune suppression. And what does that do? Does it do anything about this? No, not at all. All it does is it suppresses, it squashes the immune response so that we have less symptoms, whatever they may be, depending on the organ and the system involved, but it doesn't do anything about this. Instead, it allows for continued degeneration, and with continued degeneration, now you're going to have autoimmunity in multiple organs. So it starts often with thyroid because it's one of the most sensitive organs in the body. but then it continues to all sorts of different organs. And one very common one is pancreas, for example. The people that become type 2 diabetic, that if they do that for a while, they trigger an autoimmune process and they become type 1 or insulin dependent after having done it for a while. Another common one is cerebellum, and that's really nasty because now if you have autoimmunity, your cerebellum starts breaking down. These are people that can't walk, and they lose their balance entirely. And that's just the beginning of it. Basically, any organ in your body can get attacked.
So
Yes.
the nucleoprotein spillover is the bit that's triggering the autoimmune response?
Yes. Yes, the question was, the trigger for this autoimmune response is that the nucleoproteins that spill over, and the answer is yes. They're unique markers. So again, the liver, the nucleus of the liver cells have unique markers that make the liver cell a liver cell. And those belong in the liver and no place else. So when they end up elsewhere, and the only way they can end up elsewhere is if they escape the sewer, the reticuloendothelial system, and they end up in circulation. Circulation is going to take it everywhere where it doesn't belong. So, solutions. One interesting thing now is that they're starting to look at some other methods. And there's something called oral tolerization. And this has been done, research, they started about 1990 and they called it new research. And I've put quotation marks on that, which you'll see why in a second. But what they do is they take, if you have antibodies to your thyroid, then they take some thyroid from another animal. And all mammals work because these nucleoproteins are similar enough to invoke this immune response regardless of which mammal it is. So you can pick any animal and it still works. So they chop up some thyroid and they have you eat it, and now that acts as an antigen, and it pulls, it's in your gut, and it takes some of these, it lures, it attracts some of these antibodies that were on their way to destroy the thyroid. They pull them down into the gut where you've been fed a little bit of thyroid. So it's like a decoy for the immune system. And in the medical world, they call this promising but frustrating. They were all over it in the 1990s, and they saw dramatic differences because it works very, very quickly. However, they only saw short-term improvements. So they saw improvements for weeks or maybe months, but then people seemed to regress. So that's where the modern medical system stands on this now. However, back in 1940, 1950, there was a guy called Royal Lee who founded a nutrient company called Standard Process, and he was possibly the greatest nutrition researcher of all time, especially for that time period. And this was back when they did nutrition research on actual nutrition, not synthetic nutraceuticals and man-made things in laboratories. And he realized, he understood this whole process that we talked about even before anyone else did, and he developed something called protomorphogen therapy. So he didn't just feed people a concentrated thyroid, but he found a way, even back in the 40s, to extract the essential component. And he understood very, very early that this was what invoked that immune response. So he had a concentrated form of this. And what he realized that they still haven't realized, if they went back and looked at his research, maybe they understand it. But again, these are medical people, and this is a natural therapist, or was. He says that these protomorphogens, they don't heal anything, they don't fix anything, They simply provide an opportunity to heal. So they are nucleoprotein extracts, and they are not nutrients. They stay in the gut. Okay, so these are things that you eat, but they never leave the gut. They never get into your body. However, 85% of your immune system is in your gut. So if you take an antigen, it's not a nutrient, it's an antigen. If you take an antigen and it stays in the gut and 85% of your immune system is there, then that's going to be a very powerful decoy to keep it away from that thyroid or that liver or that spleen or that pancreas. But most importantly, it doesn't fix anything. It doesn't fix anything. It just acts as a decoy. And that's where the medical people are failing, because they don't understand that it only creates a window of opportunity to allow for healing. So while we do this, we have to provide some healing. We have to help the body heal, and now we have a window, a time to do it. So healing, like we talked about in the other seminars, is providing the body what it needs. And your body is chemical, your body is structural, and your body is emotional. So we have to help the body on all those levels. And the goal is simply to restore normal function. That's what healing is. We don't have to perform any magic, we just have to restore the body to normal, because the body is self-healing, self-correcting, self-perpetuating, everything. And we do this by eating better. And most people in this country have no idea what to eat. A lot of people, they say, oh, well, I eat well, I eat canola oil, and I eat margarine, and I eat low fat, and I eat lots of whole grains, and I don't drink soda, and I stay away from red meat, because we've been told all these crazy things. But what we mean by eating better is we need to eat whole food, and it needs to be innate food. And innate means we have to eat the way humans have eaten for tens of thousands of years. We have to eat the things that nature provides, and meat is okay, fat is okay, grain is not okay. It hasn't been around very long. It's very inflammatory, it's very destructive. We have to move better. That's the structural part. And this is where chiropractic comes in, because exercise provides movement, but if you have sections of your body, if you have portions, what happened? If you have portions of your body that are stuck, then the exercise doesn't move those areas, and you're missing that information, you're missing the signals that your body is supposed to get. And feel better, that's the emotional part. And these are things like meditation, reading something uplifting, praying, dancing, socializing with uplifting people. And this is how we restore health. And there's so much confusion here that we kind of have to start over and relearn what all that means. So that's what our channel is all about. You can find answers to all these topics, and they're based on physiology, the way it's described and developed and understood in medical textbooks, and it's based on historical data, research on what have humans done the best on in hundreds and thousands of years. And in our office, we look for solutions. We look for the causes using nutrition response testing. And this is a very, very powerful method of figuring things out. So any organ that has been stressed, we can find out through a muscle test. So let me do a quick demonstration. So this is Tracy, and she works in our office. She's been on the nutrition response testing program for a while. So even though she's not fully recovered, she does dramatically better. And she probably doesn't have any blatant faults, any blatant weaknesses. So we're just kind of demonstrate here. So muscle testing is a neurological response. We push on the arm, and what we're looking for is not how strong the person is, we're looking for how precise is that response. If we start pushing, do we get to a point where it feels rigid? That is called a locked muscle, and it's not a strength response, it's a neurological precision response. And then if I have her move her right leg forward and I push and I look for that locked response, it's not there anymore. I'm not getting it because the brain can't produce a response if there is a conflicting set of inputs. So if we have one arm forward and we put the same leg forward, this is the opposite of a gait reflex. And the brain can't function if there's conflicting things. Then it's going to turn something off. So this leg becomes an instruction to turn this arm off so that it can swing back. So that's one example of a neurological reflex. But we can also use this, and if we touch any area that has a problem, then we get the same unlocked response. And anyone can do this, but it works better the more practice you have. In the beginning, people have a tendency to push really hard and feel for strength, and again, that's not what we're looking for. So what we would do is we would go around and touch different areas, because when we compress the skin receptors, we activate receptors, and if there's some discord, if there's some stress in that area, then we're going to stress the brain and create this unlocked response. Oh, so here we get a nice lock because, again, she's been on the program, but cerebellum is quite common, frontal lobe, quite common, pituitary, thyroid, heart, spleen, mostly found. Spleen is like the main autoimmune organ. So people with lupus and systemic autoimmunity, you're almost always going to find spleen, and liver, pancreas, etc. So we can help identify, and we're not diagnosing autoimmune disease with this. We never diagnose any disease at all with this technique. It's simply a way of finding where there may be some stress in the body and then identifying nutrients that the body could benefit from. So again, this is never a way to identify or diagnose anything, but it can guide us in our attempt to restoring the body, to help the body heal. Okay. Thank you so much. And we have a question.
So are seeds and grains related? I use seeds in my cooking.
Seeds and grains are not related, other than both being plants rather than animals. Grains have very high starch content, and they also have various different proteins and compounds. I don't remember the names of all of them. I think they're phytates. And they're very difficult. They're inflammatory. They're very difficult to digest and break down. Seeds are generally very high in fat and protein, which are good for us. Some grains, like quinoa, are, even though it's a seed, it's really high in starch, but it's still better than most grains because it's not as irritating to the body. But if you're looking to reverse things like insulin resistance and go low carb, then quinoa is something you also want to avoid. But flaxseed and chia seed and sunflower seed and pumpkin seed and all those, hemp seed, all of those are very nutritious. They're low carb, they're high protein, fiber, and fat.
There's one off topic.
Okay. Off topic question. Let's see. Is it possible to gain 100 grams of fat and muscle every day for 2 months. That would be about 6 kilograms in 2 months. I would say it's possible. I would also say that it would depend on the individual. We are all very, very different. Like when I was training, I worked out daily and I ate like a horse. And I gained weight very, very slowly. I gained maybe 4 or 5 kilos over a year when I was gaining at my fastest. I know some other people who have gained 6 kilograms or 12, 13 pounds in 2 months, no problem. So it depends on your natural hormone levels, and it depends on what kind of activity you do. So I combined a lot of weightlifting with a lot of running. And if you're running, your body is less apt to put on weight. Whereas if you're only lifting weights and not moving much for anything else, then you're more likely to gain weight, and a lot of that is going to be fat. The big difference is we all have different hormone levels and different amounts of testosterone and things like that.
They are training a lot.
Yeah, and that's why people use anabolic steroids, which I don't recommend unless you want to get really, really sick and wreak havoc with everything that we talked about, because that pushes, anabolism means building, and it pushes these metabolic pathways in one direction only. So again, it'll screw you up seriously for life, so don't do it, but that's kind of why they do it. And a lot of people who get those tremendous increases, that is what they're doing.
Is there anything that I should avoid with having hyperthyroidism?
Hyper or hypo, it's kind of the same thing. It just means something is out of balance. And what happens with Hashimoto's is that you often get alternating. Hypo. Okay. So since I started saying this, whether you're hypo or hyper, it means something isn't working. And Hashimoto's can go both ways. So for a while, the thyroid is a little bit destroyed, but recovering, and then it produces very little thyroid hormone. But then it starts to recover, and then it's being attacked again, and now you have a lot of cells break open, and the damaged cells are going to spill their contents, and some of that is going to be thyroid hormone. So now you get an increase, and then you get an increased autoimmune attack and so forth. So you can go up and down for years. But again, there's something that's causing this attack, and you want to make sure that you go back to the basics. There are things such as autoimmune diets, which we didn't get into a lot. I just said innate food, but that's sort of saying the same thing. Autoimmune diet means avoiding things that are inflammatory and difficult to digest and commonly cause allergies. So the primary one to avoid is pasteurized milk, I should say, and all forms of grain, especially gluten grains, but you want to avoid all grains if you're sensitive and you really want to get to the bottom of it. Then there's a lot of different foods on a scale of decreasing importance, nightshade vegetables and spices and things like that. So trial and error, read up on it and see what works for you. If you want to get to the bottom of it, sometimes it's good to kind of get rid of all of that and start from scratch. Any more questions? All right. I think that's all we had for today. We're 2 doctors in the office. We're both chiropractors, and we work with nutrition response testing. And the supplements that we use in this office are mostly by standard process, which were all developed by this Royal Lee who discovered and refined the idea of autoimmunity and the means to deal with it. So the products that we have, there is a product for virtually every organ in the body to act as a decoy, but not only that, there are other supplements to help the body, to support the body in the healing process while these protomorphogens act as a decoy. So I can stick around for a minute or two for questions.
Well, I'm kind of bringing this up because somebody else is kind of talking about it, but if they have flax versus fish oil, like if you're a vegetarian, what do you do? Or how do you get all that in?
Yeah, there are, like we said on yesterday's seminar, there are equivalents of fish oil of vegetarian sources, but they get very expensive. You can buy DHA, which is the longest of the fish oil chains, in a vegetarian form, but again, they grow it on algae or something like that, and it gets expensive for very small doses. So if you can make yourself eat some fish or some fish oil, that's the better idea. Now, fish oil is an omega-3, and flax is also an omega-3. The problem is that flax oil gets converted gradually into longer and more sophisticated oils, and it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of enzymes and work to go from flax oil to the EPA and the DHA. And all of the things that we talk about that stress the body, the sugar and the grain and the cortisol, they interfere with this conversion. So there's one enzyme in particular called delta-6 desaturase, which is, it's like a bottleneck in this conversion process. And this delta-6 desaturase is inhibited by everything bad that we do in our lifestyles. Like I said, the sugar, the vegetable oils, the grain, the stress, the cortisol. So we convert as little as 1 to 2% of that flax oil into the final product, which means the end product, the brain, is built of DHA. And there is, if you don't have, if you have a poor conversion, if you have some of these factors, if you're not of stellar health, there is no way that you can eat enough flax oil to provide for your DHA requirements. So I would suggest, I like flax. I eat it on my yogurt. It's a great food. It has protein and fiber and fat, and it gives you a lot of these omegas. So even if I don't convert them, it's still a good food, but I make sure that I take some fish oil to provide for the EPA and the DHA. Hope that helped answer that question for you. Did we have anything else? So what is our next seminar? What's today? Tuesday, tomorrow, Wednesday. That should be cholesterol, right?
It's cholesterol. What time? 6:30?
Yeah. So we have one more seminar scheduled, and we can do more seminars throughout the month, but we were looking for requests for topics. We have some that we can kind of throw at you, but we wanted to see what specifically people were looking for. So we are scheduled for tomorrow to talk about cholesterol, and that's going to be at 6:30. And after that, we'll maybe take a break unless we get some more requests or some ideas on what to do from there. We'll definitely do some more, but we might space them out a little bit more. So hope you enjoyed this.